Now we want to talk about converting, and what we mean by that is converting decimals to fractions, fractions to decimals, and decimals to percents, and percents to decimals. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about. All right, so we'll look at this first example, 6. We have 0.234 as, and they want us to write it as a fraction. So you've got tenths, hundredths, thousandths, so it's going to be 234 over 1,000. Now, you want to simplify that fraction if you can. So the question is, well, how does 234 break down? But more importantly, how does 1,000 break down? 1,000 is just 10 times 10 times 10. So, and 10 is only a 2 times a 5. So we're only going to be able to reduce this fraction either by 2s or 5s. 5 won't go into 234, so that one's out. But I know 2 goes into 234. In fact, let me write a little factor tree down here. So how many times? That'll be the question. Well, let's see. How many times does 2 go into 234? 1, 1, 7. Okay, so I'm going to say I'm done. Now, it's not that the 117 doesn't continue to break down. 117 isn't prime, but there aren't any more factors of 2 because it's not even, and there aren't any factors of 5. So for me, when I'm trying to take a decimal to a fraction, I like to think in terms of 2s and 5s because my denominator is always going to be a power of 10. And a power of 10 only has factors of 2s and 5s. So I can just right away say, well, this is equal to 2 times 117 over 2 times, how many times does that go in? 500? All right, the 2's cancel. I know there aren't any factors of 2 in the numerator, and there aren't any factors of 5 in the numerator. So my answer is going to be 117 over 500. Now, if you don't like doing it that way, you could break them down completely into prime factorizations, both the numerator and the denominator, but you're going to get the same answer. It's a little bit easier just to think in terms of 2's and 5's in the denominator. That's how many factors you have, or that's what the factors are. Okay, so part B, negative 7/8 as a decimal. So they want us to make that a decimal. When we're converting to a decimal, in a fraction, we take the denominator, and you're going to be dividing that into the numerator. Now, I'm going to make the little house thing, put the decimal, zeros. I don't know how many zeros I'm going to need. I already have the decimal at the end of the 8, so I don't have to worry about moving, clearing the decimal in the divisor. It's already cleared. So I do have to add zeros though here until I either get a repeating decimal or till the decimal terminates. Okay, and then in the end I have to make sure I make my answer negative. Okay, how many times does 8 go into 70? 8 times. I'll put a 0 here just to remind myself to do that. 8 times 8 is 64. Subtract, add a 0. 8 goes into 67 times. This will eventually work out. 56. And that's because 8 is just factors of 2. So it might take us a minute. So we keep adding zeros until it terminates or repeats. Okay, so 8 goes into 45 times. 5 times 8 is 40. And that was it. So my answer is going to be negative 0.875. I'm going to make my decimal large enough to see. And that's the answer. That's how we convert a fraction to a decimal. And we keep going until it either shows a repeating pattern or the decimal terminates. Okay. Now we're going to talk about percents. So percent means per 100. So when we're talking 9%, we're talking about 9 out of 100. So 0.09. You're going to move the decimal place 2 decimal places to the left, okay? So 9, you're going 1, 2, and that's why we have 0.09. The next one is 87%. So we're going to go 2 places, 1, 2, 0.87. And then finally, the last one, it has a decimal. You take that decimal though and you still go 2 places. So it's going to be 0.039. And so sometimes we have to change a percent to a decimal number so that we can work with it. And that's how you do that. Sometimes we have a decimal, this one part B, sometimes we have a decimal and we need to change it to a percent. So when we do that, 2 things. First of all, we're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right. So both when you're working with percents, it's always 2 decimal places that you're moving it. So we move it to the right, and so we get 17. Then you have to make sure you put the percent sign because you changed it to a percent. You don't want it to just look like 17 because that means something else. We want it to say 17%. Okay, so the next one, we're going to move 2 decimal places, and we're going to get 175%. Okay. And then finally, we've got one here. We're going to move it 2 decimal places. Looks like we're going to get 8.25%. So again, when we're changing it to a percent, we have to put the percent symbol. So these are our answers. Changing a decimal to a percent and a percent to a decimal.